So hopefully, fingers crossed, by the end of this webinar, you will have a much better understanding of what dysgraphia is. You'll feel more confident spotting it in the classroom. And I'm going to give you some takeaway strategies to help you to support pupils with dysgraphia when you go back after Easter, or whether you put in your private work, whatever that is. So what is dysgraphia? Well, dysgraphia is basically a handwriting problem. So any handwriting problem, the conclusion that I've come to is that any handwriting problem is some level of dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is classified medically under it is a specific learning disability within the DSM-5 manual. Now, you may or may not have heard of the DSM-5 manual. The only reason I know about it is because of my specialist dyslexia training, and it is basically the sort of go-to manual. It is like the professional manual for psychologists. It does say it's for mental disorders, which makes it sound pretty harsh, because obviously we're not used to that terminology because we're not psychologists, we're teachers. But effectively, it is kind of the manual for any kind of mental disorders and specific learning difficulties and any neurological differences that a human has. So if it's not in the DSM-5, then, it doesn't hold a lot of clout. And that's quite interesting to me, because this is the manual that psychologists use as their baby and their Bible of base everything on. So the DSM-5 doesn't actually offer diagnostic criteria for dysgraphia. However, it does include difficulties for written expression. Difficulties with written expression is a specific learning difference. So I would suggest, I think, and having read lots of my own pupils' reports, this seems to be the case. You will have some where the EdPsych will say that it is actually a diagnosis of dysgraphia, but you will have some that just say there is a specific learning difficulty for written expression. And that just means actually it is dysgraphia, but they've called it something else. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so what is dysgraphia? There isn't one set definition of dysgraphia, but there's only really one sort of broad definition of dyslexia and dyscalculia. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. The word dysgraphia has a Greek origin. So dys meaning impaired and graphia meaning letter forms or making letter forms by hand. So overall, dysgraphia is an impairment in writing, not just letter writing. It's actually an impairment in writing. So it's a disorder in learning to write clearly, despite average or above average IQ and adequate teaching. Now, all of those things are easy to overlook, but we have to be clear that if there is average or above average IQ and adequate teaching, and there are still difficulties with writing, then it's likely to be a disorder of writing, which could be dysgraphia. That's why when we assess doing diagnostic dyslexia assessments, we have to make sure that that pupil has had a full education all the way through, and that nothing is preventing that pupil from accessing their education, things like hearing, vision, and that kind of thing, because we have to make sure that those things are in place before we can really say, okay, this is definitely a difficulty, a specific learning difficulty. That applies to dyslexia, and it obviously applies to dysgraphia as well. So effectively, dysgraphia will mean that this person has an underlying neurological condition. So it's difficulties expressing words in the written form. It's a handwriting problem. It's a partial inability to create or make certain alphabet or numeric symbols. But I found as well, the pupils I work with that have dysgraphia, actually, they find it really difficult to get their ideas onto paper. So the brain can't convert mental language into written images. There is an impairment in written expression. Now that's really key. So it's an impairment in written expression. It's a handwriting problem. It's a difficulty expressing words in a written form. And it's somebody that has an average or above average IQ, and they've had adequate teaching and education throughout their lives. So I think those things are all really key and worth noting. So the sort of characteristics of dysgraphia, I'm going to come on to different parts of it in a minute. So this is, there's a lot to it, actually. But poor writing skills compared to their peers or biological age. So that's the bit about sort of, you know, being average IQ. So is it less than, are their writing skills less than expected? And, you know, past probably, I don't know, the end of year 2, year 3, I think my own opinion is we probably would be able to start to spot it once that kind of, you know, more precise handwriting, the skill of handwriting itself is slightly more formed and mature. If it's still erratic, we should start to see that perhaps there's something more going on. Illegible writing, difficulty sizing letters, difficulty keeping letters on a line, mixture of uppercase and lowercase letters, mixture of printed and cursive letters, and an inconsistent letter formation and slant. So those are the main characteristics of somebody with dysgraphia. Now, all of this is going to go into the members area, so don't worry if I'm kind of rambling through it. You can go back over this at your own time. Don't worry. So more kind of telltale signs in school. So an awkward pencil grip, that can be dyspraxia as well, but an awkward pencil grip is worth paying attention to. Twisting of the body, or twisting of the paper or the wrist, and looking uncomfortable when they're writing. A reluctance to write, and a rushing to get writing over with. So a bit similar to somebody who's dyslexic and doesn't want to read. You know, specifically, this is obviously a reluctance with writing. A really inefficient and slow speed in copying, probably from the board, and then they rely on their own vision to monitor and manage what the hand is doing during writing. So on the right hand side here, I've got various samples of what a piece of text or a piece of writing with dysgraphia will look like. And obviously, what you don't know is the age of this pupil. So this is an older pupil in Key Stage 3, you know, and you would read this and you think, oh, it's either massive dyslexia or low IQ. But actually, the child does not have dyslexia. They didn't have a low IQ. So then you'd be starting to think, okay, well, why is it so difficult for him to, you know, why is he using capitals and lowercase mixed together? You know, there's difficulties with the slant is going in different directions. It's quite subtle in some places, but I'm going to go through that in a bit more detail in a minute. So this one on the left-hand side was quite interesting. This person has dysgraphia. This is an older lady in her 30s. She says, here is a sample of my handwriting when I write without thinking. This also takes effort and is painful, but doesn't require the same concentration and grip. The longer I write, the worse my handwriting gets. If I keep writing like this, eventually even I won't be able to read my own writing any longer. So if you look at the difference between her handwriting when she isn't thinking and the difference between her handwriting when she is thinking, that's quite different, isn't it? Here's a sample of my handwriting when I take my time with a lot of effort and no small amount of discomfort. I can make my handwriting legible and can only write this way for a little while, and then I become unable to write neatly and consistently. So that's quite interesting. Now, I would have said that's not massively severe dysgraphia, but I liked the context of what and the explanation. This one in the middle, hello, my name is Oliver. I'm 25. I'm dysgraphic and absolutely trash at handwriting. So this is probably more reflective of somebody with true dysgraphia. You know, they're showing, like, see how it's difficult for them to stay on the line there. They're going above and then they're going below it. And it looks like, oh, this, you know, if this was a pupil at school and we didn't know about dysgraphia, or at least bear it in mind, I would be thinking, well, this child's, you know, maybe either making absolutely zero effort in presentation, or maybe there's some dyspraxia in there as well, or whatever, I don't know. But you would be worried a bit about this, wouldn't you? But the fact that they're saying they're dysgraphic does make you think, okay, well, that makes total sense. Now, this one on the right, I have got a boy who's now in year 10, and his writing is like this. So he really struggles to get his writing down on paper. teachers really struggle to read it. He actually now uses a laptop and thrives with a laptop, and it's great. But this is I would say this is what I would see as representative as dysgraphia. So, worth having a look at that. So there's lots. So again, there's capital N there. There's capitalization through there. There's slightly odd punctuation. It's very messy. That is what I would see as being typical dysgraphia. So in my research, I can kind of see that there's two approaches for supporting students with dysgraphia. One approach is to work on work to correct handwriting skills. Now, my feeling on that is it depends on how young the pupil is. Probably the younger they are, possibly the more impact we can have, which actually is the same with most SEN profiles, particularly dyslexia. The earlier we can intervene and provide the correct support, the better the outcome will be. And the other approach is to just bypass handwriting skills completely using technology. So the boy that I was talking about at my setting, I immediately just put him on a laptop trial because he was already in year 8 when I discovered him. And, it was just really late. He's starting to get close to GCSEs. He's had no support with his handwriting all the way through. It's just too late to be going back to correct those things, in my opinion, when, he's in an academic school and it's quite tricky to try and keep up anyway. I think it depends on the situation, obviously. And perhaps if he'd had some precision teaching, where we could have done 10 minutes a day or something like that, and I had the privilege of having LSAs, which I don't, then that would have been definitely something amazing to help him in that setting, in that situation. So this is an infographic about dysgraphia. Now, this I think is quite useful, and I have made this into a PDF, and I've put it I'm going to be putting it in the resources of the Dysgraphia SEN profile within the membership. So the reason I like this is it's not massively overwhelming because it just doesn't have millions and millions of bits coming off it. It's actually ordered. So this bit here in the kind of royal blue is about organization. So these are the difficulties. So benefits from visual support, checklists are helpful, keyword vocabulary, requires time to plan, visually use mind maps or use a story map, and needs time for proofreading. I mean, if anyone can tell me the trick for getting their pupils to proofread, I'd be massively grateful, because it doesn't matter how many times I tell them they don't want to proofread. So this is a fine motor skill. So they have difficulties manipulating objects, so difficulty with a pencil grip, difficulty using equipment. Know that those are quite dyspraxic features, aren't they? So I think that's why we've got to be a little bit careful. Handwriting difficulties, so formation of letters, spacing of letters, and sizing of letters. So that's important. Concentration, trouble keeping track of thoughts, tires quickly when writing, difficulty thinking of words to write. This one here, I think the pupils that I work with, that's really common. So there's many times I've thought, I wonder if this child's dyslexic, and I've gone to do an assessment. But then when I've done like a round robin of teachers' opinions, there's nothing that comes back about processing speed or memory difficulties, or anything that would make or spelling difficulties necessarily, although it can be spelling difficulties with dysgraphia. There's nothing that's made me think, it's definitely dyslexia, there's a reading difficulty. It's only ever when there's difficulty thinking of words to write and their handwriting is poor that I would only suspect dysgraphia and would refer them on. So classroom management, obviously, assisted tech is really amazing. Speech to text, obviously, using a voice recorder. They will need extra time. I'm going to talk about JCQ in a minute, and how if you're secondary, you can help them to try and get extra time or use the scribe. And they may need support with grammar and structure, and they may need activities and instructions to be broken down. Now, a lot of that is common to so many different SEN profiles. It's not just dysgraphia, is it? But I just thought that was a really useful one to see.